If I need to talk louder, just let me know. We'll be talking about administrative separations and going over very briefly when someone should be referred for Adsep versus medical board. And stand by. Okay, yes, Ryan's getting me set up. I think I might have you.
I don't know if we would do that with Ryan.
Oh, yes. All right, so I guess next slide, Ryan.
Let me try clicking on it one more. It's clicked on it, so
Try
you
again.
should be able to control it.
Hey, there we go. So I have no disclosures to make, and I've done a safety brief, so like stay seated, please don't fall, get hurt, and if you do, you know where the emergency room is, and we're happy to take it. So the agenda for this talk is we're going to discuss when should we consider MEB and Adsep when we see our patients, how we should conceptualize this referral decision, because I think the decision-making framework is really important for us to all be on the same page for. And then go over some of the criteria that would be met in which someone would get referred to a medical board, because that precedes an Adsep in most cases, our role in the process, and how we can manage transference when going through Adsep. And this decided to stop working. Okay, right. For someone. Bad. Thanks. And when I looked at this as an intern, I kind of felt like I should know about this at this point, but I didn't, and that was really frustrating. Then I got over that and started asking questions. So if you feel like you're lost in this process, you don't have to be, so always ask for help because we're here for you. When I was putting this presentation together, I collected all of the high-yield documents into one of my Dropbox folders, and I'm sharing a link to that and a QR code that also contains this presentation. So if you want to have access to this, these slides, and all of the relevant DoD instructions for your future reference, this should save everyone some time. And I'll also drop a link in the group chat, but this could be something to save for your personal reference. Oh, sorry, later on. Let me know when you're all ready. Yeah. So for learning outcomes, we're gonna make sure that you know what psychiatric conditions are good for administrative separation. We're going to go over the procedures, which includes 2 DoD forms and a DoD website on when we're like, hey, we're going to Adsep you, what steps we actually need to take to make that happen. And we'll go over all the policies and regulations. So when is it my job? I did my best to include source material from DoD instructions. And it turns out that it is always our job every time. And I think for me, this has become a really core part of my physician identity, as Dr. Bean would call it, that we really do have a very special and unique job that is very different from any other psychiatrist in this country's job. Like on a sleep elective, I got to see someone who was falling asleep while driving at work with stop signs. And normally that would be not, so big of a deal, but this person was transporting nuclear weapons in the NCR on some of our Air Force bases. And nobody else has that kind of position where the decisions we make have such a huge impact on national security and health and welfare of people living around these nuclear weapons, for example. And that's why they're saying us big bucks, one of my favorite sayings, Dr. So conceptualizing that we should always be considering, should we be administratively separating you or bringing a med board? Broadly, in very general terms, what are the differences between these two things? The big one is that in a medical board, these service members will receive either payment or disability coverage or the related conditions, usually for the rest of their life or to the improvement of the condition. And the time frame is the big one. So 9 months on the very, very short end. Over a year is more typical for these med boards. And for an administrative separation, it is usually going to be under honorable conditions, which is something that a lot of service members that were separated are very worried about, kind of wondering, oh my gosh, like I'm being administratively separated because you told me I have a personality disorder. Is that going to show up on my separation paperwork? And could that impact my future employability? And reaffirming to them that unless you've broken big bad laws, that you will get an honorable discharge, and make them a lot more amenable to having this discussion and being supportive of pursuing this administrative separation process. And one of the big things to remember is that we make a recommendation for administrative separation, but it is a commander's decision. And they can always decide to retain the individual because the needs of the military outweigh the needs of the individual. And Landon gave me this great way of thinking about it, almost like we are giving you a resignation from the military when we're administratively separated. And if anyone has any pearls, I've learned more from y'all than I can give credit to. So if anyone has pearls at any point, like please feel free to shout them out, because y'all know a lot more than I do. So conceptualizing like when we should refer and what the conditions that meet like that criteria are, I found this section really helpful. So take a second to read it. I'll give you a minute or two. And then if at the end of that, someone can kind of summarize what your big takeaway is, that would be great. So I'll give you like a minute or two to read this, because I think it is pretty important. All right, so who has a takeaway that they want to share that kind of summarizes the underlying recommendation for when we should be referring to that order asset? Yeah, Summer.
Not to be too flippant about it, but I want to know that if I were to send this person out with a weapon and an MRE, they could take care of themselves for at least a little while without the aid of a physician.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Dr. Navarro talks about that a lot, that we are sending these people out to war, and we need to know that they are going to be able to handle those stressors and perform some pretty extraordinary tasks. And if we have any concerns about their ability to do so, we need to try to treat them. And if we do not think that is possible or get failed treatment, that we are pursuing avenues of separation. So when we are talking about how someone is unable to perform their duties, we can think about it in two ways: their duty impairment and their duty limitation. When we're thinking about duty impairment, I think of it as the things that I am not able to do because of my condition. And then the duty impairment is professionally the role that I'm unable to fill. So an example of a duty limitation would be classically not access to service weapons. So if you are so depressed that it is impacting my ability to do well at my job, that would be a limitation, and then the impairment would be, that would be the impairment, and the limitation would be you can't have access to firearms. So we should be screening for these two things and asking ourselves, does my patient's presentation cause any either impairment or limitation that would impede their ability to serve in an employed setting? And if those things exist, we need to be driving our treatment towards resolving those impairments and those limitations. So before we even consider, should I administratively separate or headboard this person, we need to have identified the limitations or impairments and come up with a plan on how we're going to directly solve those issues. So the thing that happens first is we need to ask ourselves, are they eligible for a medical board? So this is a giant, spreadsheet that we, or flowchart that we seen last year. So I'm breaking it down so it's a little bit easier to follow. So we need to identify, do they have a medically boardable condition? And if they do, they need to have either failed adequate treatment and have 1 year of recovery unexpected. A caveat to this is if they're presenting with a condition that we know will not improve within a year or will be untenable for military service, that we should not wait to initiate a medical board process. So if they have a chronic psychotic or bipolar disorder, these people get referred to medical board, and that is kind of outside the scope of this discussion. But again, chronic psychotic or bipolar disorders go straight to medical board, and we don't even talk about them for administrative separation. The next question we ask ourselves is their dysfunction due to a medically boardable condition. Then we ask ourselves if they received adequate treatment. If they have not, they are not at this medical readiness decision point, and we continue treating them until they have received adequate treatment. And once they have, we say, do we expect recovery within a year? Yes, great, we get to stay in the military. No, great, we get to refer them to medical board. So when I was trying to find a medically boardable condition, Dr. Amin put me on this amazing tool that I've become absolutely obsessed with because of how powerful it was. So with Google, I was having a hard time finding a list of the medically boardable conditions. So I went to ChatGPT and asked it in free text, like, where can I find a list of conditions that would help trigger medical board for active duty U.S. Army soldier that would preclude an Adsep? And it was able to solve that question and provide me with the relevant DoD instruction, which drastically reduced my amount of search time. So I'm going to encourage you to, when you're looking for this information, if you're having difficulty with Google, to make use of OpenAI's ChatGPT, because it made preparing for this presentation way easier than it would have done without it. So check it out. It's a great tool. So thank you, Dr. Reed, for the pointer. Okay, so when we look at that document that gives us a list of conditions that are medically boardable, these are also people who will need a permanent profile. So whenever you see that patient and you're thinking about Adsep, you should also have a secondary heuristic that pops in and says, do I need a profile for this person? So if you're thinking about Adsep, you'll probably need a profile. And briefly, some of the conditions that we need to screen for that would result in a will refer to DES for evaluation would be for sleep, obstructive central apnea with failure of positive airway pressure interventions, central hypersomnia, circadian rhythm disorders, and parasomnias. And these are things that all cause some kind of duty limitation. So if they have these conditions and they're duty limited, they need to be referred. And there's a brief list for psych. I'd strongly encourage you to look at this document and just skim through it because it has some great guidance. And then for Adsep conditions, there's a list of all of these things that would not receive a medical board, but would receive an administrative separation. The big one to note is the adjustment disorder being acute on the left-hand side for Adsep and adjustment disorder being chronic on the right-hand side of the medical board. When we are conceptualizing adjustment disorder, we can think about it as, is this person having over 6 months of dysfunction from adjustment to a single stressor? Or has the service member been exposed to different stressors and has a series of recurrent acute adjustment disorders with different stressors? And the way that we diagnose that makes a difference for their military disposition, our ability to administratively separate them if that's what's in the patient and the service's best interest. So, is your patient ready for Adsep? So, we've already identified that they do not have a chronic psychotic or bipolar disorder. They do not have a medically boardable condition that is contributing to their dysfunction. So, we then reach the second part of this flowchart, where we ask dysfunction due to non-boardable condition other than substance. So, do they have a DSM diagnosis that is not med-boardable and is not a substance use disorder? If the answer is yes, so basically if they have one of these Adsep conditions, we proceed and we ask, does it interfere with duty? If it does not, we can provide some treatment and we can kind of move on. But if it does interfere with duty, and this is kind of where we come in, we need to make sure that they have some kind of formal counseling and an ample opportunity for improvement before we make any more steps. And we need to trial at least one or more treatment modalities, although 2 or more is better. And if those criteria have not been met, we continue to treat, try to get them back to duty. And if that doesn't work, we complete these 2 forms, D83822 and then 7771, and we chapter them through 5-14. But let's say their dysfunction is due to a substance use disorder. We are going to enroll them in a substance use program. And if further efforts are impractical or unlikely, or what happens a lot of times is they'll just refuse to participate, then we can chapter separate them under Chapter 9 for failure of treatment for substance use. If their dysfunction is due to misconduct, they can get a Chapter 14 separation. So those are 3 chapters that are kind of using, so having them all at the same place, pretty helpful. So this is important, and people will talk about it all the time for our interns here throughout their residency, and remembering these 3 things will solve a lot of confusion. So just remember that chapter 514 is an other designated physical or mental conditions, and it includes adjustment disorders that the service member needs at least one issue with acute adjustment, and it needs to continue to interfere even with treatment. So when you're documenting these encounters, if a duty impairment exists from their condition, make sure that you're describing what that impairment is so that when this goes to the board, they have information to review so that the service member can get the disposition they need. When it comes to personality disorders, AR 635-200 provides some guidance on what needs to be documented for an Adsep for personality disorder to successfully occur. And we need to show that it is pervasive and inflexible, that it is stable over time, and that there are counselings showing their job impairment, and that the impairment continues despite counselings and interventions. So this could be something where communication with command is important, that we get a command referred service member to be evaluated for personality disorder, considering for administrative separation. We need to communicate that, hey, command, one of the things that we need to do on your end is to be clearly documenting your efforts, counseling, and continued impairment. So when this goes to the bureaucratic process, that they have what they need to make their decision. When it comes to substance use disorder treatment failure, we can consider discharge when someone is enrolled in treatment and has failed that treatment, or if we feel that further rehab is unlikely to produce a fully mission-ready service member, or if the service member lacks potential. So the takeaway is that it's really up to command of what happens to someone when they pop positive on like THC drug screen, or if someone shows up drunk to work. They have the authority to make these decisions, and it's a lot of gray area that we can provide guidance on. And then finally, for misconduct, I've seen that we can get involved in misconduct separations only when command has a concern that behavioral health condition may be contributing to the misconduct. So we might be asked to evaluate someone who is being separated from misconduct, and we need to weigh in on, hey, do we think their depression, their anxiety, their acute psychotic disorder is playing a part in their behavior? Yes, sir.
Well, for 14, it is a requirement that all of them undergo command recommended status evaluation. So you will have to opine on whether or not someone requires an MEV in addition to Chapter 14. So most of the time, it would be a no, and they'll just move on and get separated. Sometimes you might end up with a situation where they do have some underlying psychiatric condition, and they have fallen below the retention standards, and then they'll end up in the dual track, which we've discussed before. So then the general will have to, with input from his or her, command surgeon or command psychiatrist, will then have to determine which way the soldier is going to go. Are they going to go the MED route, or are they going to go the misconduct route?
Thank you, sir. And I will fix this slide so anyone who's in the future has that correction.
And I think another one too that sometimes can get sticky in that is when we look at the bottom when you talk about TBI and MST, PTSD also goes in there too. And so sometimes, like Dr. Mead was alluding to, sometimes you have to make the call as to whether PTSD is the contributing reason why they are not performing or not doing well. And so specifically, I think a lot of times that comes up when we have people whose borderline personality is making it very difficult to work in the military, but they do have like a traumatic history, right? They do have PTSD, but we're being required to act like, is it the chicken or the egg? Like, which one is creating the dysfunction, like in the workplace?
Thanks, Chelsea. All right, so the Army policies regarding administrative separation. So these are the big 6 policies. They're in the Dropbox folder I shared. When you have some time to call those, recommend you just skim through them quickly. And I'm not going to go over each one now. A great place to find this information in one place if there are any updates is it has some of the documents, but not all of them, and the links at the bottom. It was a great resource for preparing for this. All right, so the keynotes of 635-200 is that this applies to enlisted personnel, and comments on the role that commanders need to take, that counseling must be a part of this, that they need to consider certain things like rehabilitative transfer if there's merit to that. Again, Adseps are usually honorable, and if someone meets criteria for a separation based on this, then that's something that if it's highlighted in red, that is a separation that is initiated by behavioral health, and that's something we communicate with 3822. And then more information on adjustment disorders. So this DA 7771 is something that the Office of the Surgeon General is going to fill out along with command to make sure that the administrative separation includes everything that needs to be sent. The big thing that's our role is going to be the 9A, included a copy of the DA 3822 as part of the separation packet. And for all of our interns, are any of you guys not familiar with the 3822? No? Okay, cool. And then this is the bottom part that the medical reviewer in the OTSD office is going to also sign off on once the commander signs to say that everything that was in the packet was there, and they're good to proceed with the Adsep. So when we are asked to see someone or they come into 7 West and a question of Adsep comes up, there are a couple of things that we must screen them for. The first part is that we need to clear them for separation by making sure that they don't have a vent-portable condition, and if they do have a vent-portable condition, that they use them that way. We need to determine whether or not they can understand right from wrong to be able to participate in these proceedings, and then evaluate whether PTSD, TBI, or other conditions contribute to the failures and circumstances that are leading to their separation. And this includes a screening for military sexual trauma. Especially for our interns, the rules for how and when we disclose military sexual trauma will be something that we will deal with very, very, very frequently. So this is really important to remember. If you remember like nothing else in this talk. If their military sexual trauma resulted in an unrestricted report, we can comment on the sexual assault contributing to PTSD. But unless they have an unrestricted report, we cannot disclose that military sexual assault happened without the unrestricted report. In the 3822, we can document it in Alta, but not in any documents that go to service members. And one of the things that the SMEDCOM 21024 says is that if we need multiple visits to accomplish this, we can take as much time as we need. I feel like you need to get this done in a single visit if you don't feel like you can do an adequate job. And then when we are seeing these people, our role is to provide the evaluation and then interact with this thing called the DHAR website where we will upload the 3822. I'm not a third year, so I don't know if we do this or if we have like clinic staff that does this.
You do it.
We do it? Okay. And then this documents will be reviewed by the OTSG. So we will also comment if they've been deployed to this hostile fire danger area. And there is a resource to figure out if a service member's deployments qualify for this imminent danger pay.
Can you go back one more time?
Yeah.
A couple of things I want to unpack on this. So this is important. So someone shows up, you diagnose them with acute adjustment disorder. You know, it's a young soldier. He has been in the Army for 2 months, and he says, I can't stand this. And you ask him, you know, if you were not in the Army, how do you think you would be? Like, oh, life would be amazing. I.e., the test of figuring out whether this is sort of reactive to something, Army service, right? So you probably heard me talk about anaphylaxis to Army service. So what do we do with people that have enough access to food? We separate them, right? It's good for them, it's good for us. So the mechanics of that is that there's the bureaucracy attached to this. And the bureaucracy has continued to get bigger and bigger, and there's some historical elements to it. So when we went to Iraq, there was a surge of people coming back, and we were Adseping people left and right. And often we got it wrong, where people might have had medically boardable conditions where they should have been medically boarded, but we Adcept them. So it became a political football, and the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force's response was, we're going to have these, essentially, we're going to supervise all these providers to make sure that they're doing the right thing and no soldier is getting the crappy end of the stick, okay? But this is where this bureaucracy comes in. So if it's a straightforward adjustment disorder case, you know, most often it'll just fly through this and it'll get approved. But there are certain subpopulations of people, if you're going to accept them, i.e. they have service-related PTSD or something like that, that's going to have to be reviewed at a higher level. So in other words, you know, they have delegated all this responsibility to us, but they took back some of that delegation. And so our role in this is we do our clinical assessment and we do our due diligence. So you got to know how to do that, which you all do. And then you do the 3822. You fill out the DA form, which is new as of last year, right? A year ago, I think. And that is meant, again, as a forcing function. So can you go back to the form? Stop right there. So there's really not a whole lot. So this is a forcing function for making sure you got 3822 and then go to the next one. And then it is all in caps to make sure commanders are not doing things that are violating these requirements. But they just added, so bureaucracy is there to make sure that we remain professional, right? So, so this form is just an add-on, just a forcing function, and then keep going straight to the BHAR page. And so then you take all of that packet, and you may even include their last evaluation or your note. You upload it into BHAR. So if you've never used BHAR, when you go to the website, you'll see how to get access to that. The other thing I wanted to unpack is it talks about IDPH. Who doesn't know what an IDPH is? Some of you should not. So, so for the Navy folks, so it's essentially the senior person on that particular installation who's responsible for overseeing psychological readiness and wellness, essentially. So for us, we're not really in a real Army installation, right? So I think it's Colonel Navarro, and he might have delegated it to someone. I know Colonel Wiggs tried to delegate it to me, and I said, I don't want it. But when you go to other bases, you'll know exactly who the IDPH is. So for example, Major Blood is at Fort Meade, right? She's the IDPH with yeah. So there it's sort of easier, but at Walter Reed, it's a very non-conventional type of structure here. So the first layer of supervision is the IDPH is going to look it over, and if they sign off on it, some of those will then get reviewed by the Office of the Surgeon General. There's staff that work there, it could be psychologists or psychiatrists. They'll review it and they'll sign off on it. And once they do, then the unit legal will have that, and then they can go ahead and execute whatever chapter you're going to separate an individual. Does that make sense? So it can be as quick as I've seen it get done within 10 days, depending on how motivated people are.
That was a type of listed, is there an officer equivalent?
There is an officer equivalent, but I have never seen it, but officers end up going through something called board of inquiry. And then a bunch of your peers review what's going on, and then they determine and make recommendations. It's like a case-by-case basis. Okay. So that was that.
Thank you, Dr. May. That was actually really helpful. Okay, great. So there was another really great figure about how we proceed with the administrative separation that was just a little bit different from the first flow chart that was given. The text is a little bit small, so if you ever find yourself thinking about Adsep, just take a look at this, my slides. But the big thing is reinforcing that they do not have a medical affordable condition, that they then do have an acceptable behavioral health condition, and that they have a poor prognosis that is unlikely to improve treatment. So if they do not have a acceptable condition, then our administrative separation recommendations for the individual don't really apply. So we can only recommend administrative separation for people under the chapters we talked about if we diagnose them with a behavioral health condition. And here's a list of the conditions that can get someone an Adsep. So if you're pursuing Adsep, make sure that you've made a diagnosis and make sure that that condition is appropriate for separation under the chapter that you're planning on pursuing.
So somewhere where I always kind of get stuck, particularly like on 7 West and 4 North, are service members who have like recurrent acute adjustment disorders. And I see the bottom middle there, the soldier has been given ample opportunity to overcome their symptoms. What would you say, or was there anything in any of your meetings that you did on how much, is there a timestamp on that, or is it just more, how do we quantify that?
Yeah, so the question was how long is like a trial treatment?
Right.
And the answer that I found was kind of nebulous. It's, do I expect them to be able to return to full duty within a year? And at least one or more like trials have been used, and that would be like 2 kinds of psychotherapies, or psychotherapy plus a med, or 2 different meds, or any IOP, or any residential program. And they need to have failed ideally 2 or more of those before we will say that, you know, poor prognosis is unlikely to improve in a year.
Yep. Are you talking about med boards or adjustment disorders?
Adsep for
Adjustment, okay. Can I make a comment? Okay, so, the stolen valor person, where is he? Zach. So, do you remember the number of hours in the Navy for a new adjustment disorder? We talked about it last time, right? 72 hours, correct?
They have symptom free,
Mhm.
right? Yeah.
So in the Navy, it's just to answer your question, Jess. So her question was, how about those individuals that have kind of various adjustments or reactions to different conditions that are going on in their lives? So for the Navy, there's a 72-hour thing. In the Army, there's not a time frame that I know of. I don't think it exists. Can you go back to the list of chapters that we have? Go forward again. You missed it. No, you don't. Yeah, right there. Thanks. Okay. Okay. So, you see some of those other ones that we never talk about. So the red ones are the ones that behavioral health gets involved in, and then 14 we get involved in because we have to as part of requirement for them to undergo mental status evaluation, but there are all these other ones, so there might be an individual who's just not resilient. Should I use the potato and the egg? All right, I won't do that. But there are certain people that keep on having reactive stress to everything. Like, oh, I have a new sergeant and I don't like them, and so now they're stressed out. Or it might be one of my fellow soldier was PCS, and so now they're having issues. So there might be other ways of removing them or discharging them, separating them from the Army. However, the easiest one from JAG perspective, from command perspective, tends to be 514 for the Army. That's the quickest route. There's a lot more requirements for some of these other ones. Unsatisfactory performance of Chapter 13 is out there, that you guys know. Pregnancy is an option for enlisted soldiers to separate under, and then dependency for hardship. So let's say someone's parents have some hardship and they're like the sole caregiver, they might request separation under Chapter 6. So there are all these other options for them. To go back, adjustment disorder, what they are asking is they're not necessarily saying you have to, your intervention needs to be clinical. So what the requirement is that the commander have made efforts to try to remediate the soldiers. So it could be coaching and counseling. So we tell commanders, hey, every time you counsel this soldier, you need to make sure there's written counseling, and so that could be an intervention. So the failing the 2 psychotherapies and 1 psychotherapy, that's a threshold for NEB. For this, it may be like 3 appointments with a therapist, and then the commander maybe moves them from one section to another because the soldier's not getting along. It could be all those work-related interventions, just to satisfy the lawyers that, hey, we have done sufficient amount of counseling and coaching to try to improve this individual performance. But despite that, he's not responding to that. So we can separate it because the clock is ticking, right? So sometimes the adjustment might have started when they were at AIT, and now you're seeing them 2 months later, and it was documented. So now you're on the clock, and it's ultimately. You want to have a sense of urgency, and you want to be able to coach and communicate that to company commanders. Often they have no clue, right? So we assume that, oh, there's a commander, it's a company commander. And those commanders are doing a million things, so you just got to meet with them and say, hey, here's the deal. I need you to do this. Start a packet, talk to Jack, so that you've got everything ready to go. Because if they screw up, it might get stuck in the legal process, and then you end up with a chronic adjustment disorder, and now the soldier is stuck in the Army for 30 or 14 months undergoing PED. There's a question.
I was just going to make a comment. There's also that catch-all rule that goes in 514, right? Continued service, not in the best interest of the military, which I think a lot of fall under your high level.
Yeah, so the question was, there's an element of continued service not being in the best interest of the military. I've never seen that personally. I don't know what the JAG would say, but remember, the commander getting input from us, and then they're getting input from legal. And in my experience, legals tend to be very legalese, and so they want to make sure they check all the boxes because they want to protect the commander. Because what can happen is, let's say someone feels like they have been forced out, and we didn't do all those things, they could do a congressional inquiry, and then that commander can potentially lose his or her job if they don't check all the boxes.
That's a good question, and I don't know, maybe Dr. Mead, maybe you know this stuff too, but some of these things I feel like they could be stuff you get court-martialed for too. Is that like totally separate from Adsep, or do you like have to court martial them first and then separate them, or specifically thinking about, fraudulent enlistment, I think can be court martialed, or misconduct, that's very vague, right? But some of those would be stuff you could court martial.
So I'll tell you, the threshold to court martial people is pretty high, because, we've got all these sexual assault cases that we are not able to adjudicate. So just like the civilian system, our professional kind of judiciary system is really and under-resourced. So in the DOD, in uniform, if you do something bad, right, so there's behavioral disorder, there's disordered behavior. If you do something bad, there are two options. In the Navy Marine Corps, we call it NJP, right? You've heard that term, NJP, a non-judicial punishment. So this is a non-professional adjudication by the commander. The commander is not a lawyer or a judge. And so we have these, chapter 14, for example. So those are called NJPs for the Navy folks. And so these are going outside the court system. And one of the big criticisms, this is sort of a bigger picture, one of the bigger criticisms with sexual assault stuff is, people say we need to professionalize these processes because commanders don't know what they're doing in terms of punishing people that commit these crimes. But historically, commanders have, rather than court-martialing people, they have gone to the NJP, and most of the time, they make a deal and say, let's just get rid of this person. He's a headache for us, for the command. You're babysitting him. Let's get him out of here. So they end up under Chapter 14, usually other than honorable, and we can discuss that at the end if need be. But so you do something bad, you can go non-judicial punishment, or you can go court-martial, and then the court-martial, you've got three different subtypes of court-martial depending on the level of the crime, for example. So I think whether it's special, court-martial, general summary, special, and then general court-martial. But those systems are really clogged. Just in our division, can you guys guess how many lawyers in one division, headquarters? Yes. 34. And they were all stressed out. Most of the time, so the stuff we see, unless someone ends up in a break or prison, they're unlikely to end up going to court-martial. So this is it. Most of the time, it's like, how quickly can we get rid of this headache? We've got better things.
So we're gonna go through a couple of vignettes and then take a break and hand it over to Ryan. So we've just been referred the service member for a directed evaluation, and we're thinking about Adsep them for work performance. They're getting fights with derricks. Can you please see them weigh in on if they have a behavioral health condition that we could have something for? So can I have a volunteer to kind of answer some of these questions on the slide?
Yeah.
So for number one, I think typically check chart review, typically the commander won't know if they have behavioral health history, or sometimes they don't know. So usually going on the health side, we get a lot of CDs for guard or reserve units, and they'll have no health records. You can go to jail baby. So trying to find some of that information as possible.
And then when you see that patient, what are your therapeutic and diagnostic goals? Do you actually have the equipment?
No therapeutic goals, just diagnostic, and you only have 90 minutes to do this whole thing, so it's going to be pretty superficial.
we absolutely must screen for when we see these patients that are being Adsep.
If you've seen the 3822, it's got boxes that you check, right? PTSD, head injuries, sexual assaults. Might be forgetting one.
Yeah.
Yeah, you said?
Yeah.
And you don't have to make any of that up, so if you're hesitant on what is considered proper screening, that AR regulation has the screening forms enclosed, so all you have to do is like print out or pull up those screeners and go boom, 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 like question, nope, good, okay, moving on. Like you don't have to make any of this stuff up.
Yeah, and those screeners are also in the Dropbox folder at the end of the regulations, so you'll have access to them. But yeah, just as Connor said, when we get these appointments, we need to do a record review. We need to evaluate them for a med-portable condition if there's not one documented in Alta or JLP. And we need to be sure that we're communicating with both the service member and the commander what our recommendations are. And at the end of the visit, and I realize this kind of wasn't blown up this big, we're going to be comparing the 3822. And there are two boxes that we need to think about. Do they meet medical retention standards, and have they reached the MRP? And if they meet the criteria for Chapter 5 separation, which we talked about in earlier slides. So as we go through some of the next thing, just think about when you would select each one of these. So let's say a service member that you're seeing screened positive for military sexual trauma, but they did not file any report. When you're filling out 3822, for the top boxes asking about screenings performed, when would you check these boxes? Or would you always check these boxes? Like, what are these boxes for?
Well, if you did the screening.
Yeah.
They're positive.
Yeah, so even if they screen negative, but you perform the screening for these things, we need to check these boxes. So this is a forcing function, just like the 5771 is a forcing function to make sure that we are acting in the service member's best interest. So when you're filling out 3822, even if someone's screened negative for these things, but you did the screening, which you should always do for these evaluations, those boxes need to be checked as a forcing function to make sure that we're being professionals in our role. And then I have one of our interns. When can you share that a military sexual trauma contributed to their misconduct leading to separation?
Only with the unrestricted report.
Awesome. So if your patient screens positive for PTSD, let's say we're seeing this person, they screen positive for PTSD, what do we need to do? So this MedCom policy 21024 gives us some guidance on what we need to do. And one of the big questions that we have is this condition currently active, and do they meet retention standards? So if you had PTSD a long time ago, it's in remission, and it's not giving you any symptoms that are contributing to why you're being Adsep right now, we could say that you do meet these retention standards. But if it's service-related PTSD, there is another exception that we need to follow. So if this PTSD is service-connected, they need to be referred to IDES, which is a disability evaluation system, before we can administratively separate them. So again, the second thing that I don't want you to forget from this talk is if they have service-related PTSD, we cannot Adsep them until they've been evaluated by IDES. And that's another forcing function to make sure that what Dr. and me talked about us kind of picking out people from Iraq or too soon maybe, that doesn't happen again. Any comments from anyone who's actually done separations and handled some of these situations? Okay, cool.
How do you refer to IDES without making a medical report? I don't know what that is.
So it would be a mental profile. It would be a permanent profile for PTSD, and then they'll look through, and you can also document that, ideally you communicate with the AED office. But you say, based on, the AR requirements, I'm putting a permanent profile for this. I don't think that they failed retention standard, and then you can document that. So it'll go through the process, and essentially it's a forcing function for a second opinion. And they'll look through it, and then they'll come back and say, yeah, we have reviewed, and this person, meets medical retention standard. And then you can go through this BR process and attach that paperwork, so that when OTSD is looking at it, they're like, oh, okay, someone's opined on this, and then they can sign off on the chapter separation.
Yeah, I just kind of want to expand on IDIS for like the first and second years. So the integrated disability evaluation system it has three components. The first one is the MED, the medical evaluation board. So whenever you're referring to MED, it's the first step of the IDIS process. So it's the MED, PEB, which is physical evaluation board. Then the third step is either separation or reintegration. So whenever you do IDIS, you can think first step of MED. Or the MED is the first step of that.
So then one of the other special situations that we come across a lot when we screen someone, they screen positive for a military sexual trauma. And the screening tool that is part of the AR 21024 on the slide, like Chelsea said, all these screenings are in the policy, so make use of them, don't reinvent the wheel. So when we are doing this evaluation, just a reminder that this can only go on the 3822 if it was an unrestricted report, and if it's positive, we need to comment on whether or not we think that the alleged assault played a role in the condition leading to separation. And then when this information is evaluated by the OTSP, that entire bureaucratic process is going to make sure that we're working in service members' best interest. But our role in this process is that if someone has been positive for military sexual trauma, that we are commenting on how we feel that sexual assault impacted the separation presentation. Does that make sense? And that's our role in the process as I understand it. So I was kind of confused. What should I do with that information if someone says, yeah, I have been sexually assaulted in the military? Any comments or questions? Because I think this is a pretty important point. So, yeah, and then again, it doesn't go on 3022 unless it's an unrestricted report and cite the policies that anyone needs them in the future.
So one quick comment. Go back to the right there. So the thing about, if you have had sexual trauma and you're positive on this, this is not a forensics evaluation, right? So don't overthink it. But let's just say that there's a soldier who was really well, and all of a sudden ends up with a acute adjustment disorder diagnosis. And as you unpack the issue, because I use the term "she" because that tends to be the predominant traumatized group. She comes to you and she sent for this evaluation. You realize that she was doing fine, but then the perpetrator was moved into the unit. Right? So that you could then opine that most people who have been traumatized by something, she may not meet PTSD diagnosis, etc. We might opine that she might have avoidance or it may impact her mood, her motivation, energy level, all those things, and it may lead to dysfunction, essentially, right? What would be even worse is if for whatever reason, she was being separated for chapter 14 misconduct, and it was that person. She punched that person or something like that, and they're, you know, in misconduct for doing, what is it, in the Marine Corps, or Article 94, disobeying a command from the NCO, or 93, I think. But anyway, so in that type of scenario, I mean, you're gonna have to pick up the phone and stop the whole process, right? Because that would be highly, highly unfair. You'll end up with a misconduct label, and you're gonna have like, no, that's not gonna happen. And for you, we're constantly balancing the two hats that we wear. So what I've done in one situation is, like, does not, you know, strictly meets criteria for PTSD. There's this unspecified trauma factor, right? So just go with some sort of DSM criteria, just to, because the system is not necessarily always designed to match these things, so you'll have to be creative.
And Dr. in that scenario, if the service member has filed a restricted report, is your notification to, hey, this process should probably stop? Do you call the commander or do you call legal? Like, what's your tangible of how you enact that?
I'll call the commander and I'll say there are significant issues that I'm not able to disclose to you, but I'll need to seek guidance from legal. You can go to your own medical legal, right? Don't go to his JAG officer, but go to your own medical and you can get guidance from them. You can get guidance from your installation director of psychological health, IDPH, and just, you know, get input in terms of like, how are we gonna sort this out? Again, you are that forcing function again in the process to make sure that there's fairness in the system. So if you find something like that, I always alert the commander, but just let him know that there's stuff that I cannot disclose to you. However, pause on everything until we sort this out. And this is one of the beauty of embedded behavior health, because often you'll end up with a relationship because you're responsible for that brigade or that regiment, for the Oscars, for Navy, and so for that person, like, you know, this Zach Monahan guy, pretty, you know, I trust him, and so if he told me he's worried about something, I better stop.
Thanks, Joe. It's really helpful.
And that's good. Another question, just because I'm thinking about, you know, these soldiers who are being assaulted, and I know that sexual assault is hard to kind of convict even outside of the military, but I'm just wondering, is this, you know, the command sort of being a gate of discipline, you know, having this like NJP option for potential assault perpetrators? Is this kind of like, you know, as do, like, if you were assaulted, do you still have a route to charge somebody, or do you have to kind of let the commander screen these things and stuff, you know, for ECMJ?
My understanding is that it was passed in the enacted in January of this year, I believe, that a third-party review and judicial process for military sexual assault is going to be put in place, but I don't know if that's correct.
But what are the recommendations from investigation panel and committees to get third parties separate?
So that would be their avenue for getting justice outside of the command process, that they should be able to access that. We're almost at the end. I want to kind of move quickly, so Ryan can get into his main stuff. So I the end of the day, we are, just to review, we're screening people for PTSD. We are identifying if it's service connected, we're putting a stop to the process. We're screening them for sexual assault. If they have sexual assault or traumatic brain injury that interfered with, whatever it was that's leading to the separation, you can put a halt to things, and act as the service member advocate. If we comment on whether or not we feel that the behavioral health condition that we diagnose them with is contributing to whatever they're being separated for. This is a really important box. So think carefully about whether or not you want to weigh in on yes or no. Personally, I think I would lean more towards yes and feel a little more willing to give people benefit of the doubt.
Be my 2 cents. It's one of the hardest things. This will come up a lot in that dual track, where people, for those of you who have been division in psychiatry, there might be different policies depending on what division you're with. Same goes for the officer psychiatrist. The commander has to decide whether someone is going to go this way or that way, right? That's one situation where this is really relevant. Should the soldiers be medically boarded? They have both depression and MED, but they have, maybe they did cocaine or something like that, right? So misconduct. So which way do they go? So that's one instance where you might be asked to opine and give in writing recommendations. So in our division, so that opinion came from me delegated to the surgeon, who then delegated it to me essentially. So I had a little memo, and I would review the packet, and I would say, but when I first got it, it was a big sort of ethical dilemma for me. So I got in touch with the forensics folks. There's 0 guidance on this. And so between me and, you guys remember Dr. Smith, forensics, he got out about maybe 3 years ago, retired anyway. So, so that was one thing, and I'll just give you, so I think I reviewed about 140 cases, and there were 3 instances where I checked yes on that. Everything else I didn't, and this was based on, I just pulled this up, I'll share this with you guys, but the dual track guide that I created for myself. So a couple of things that happen when someone does something, some behavior, right? So either someone is not performing or misconduct would be worst case scenario. So they have to know that they're being reckless, right? So recklessness is the capacity to foresee the outcome plus decisional capacity. So most of our conditions, unless you've got Alzheimer's or something like that, do not really impact decisional capacity, right? Unless you're acutely psychotic. So do they have the capacity to foresee the outcome of their behavior, whatever that might be? So you'll have to ask yourself, does their depression, would that cause them to be reckless? Right? Decisional capacity usually does not affect it, but otherwise, and then responsibility, knowledge of wrongfulness, and then capacity to appreciate criminality of conduct. So this is specifically for misconduct, but, or you could say inappropriateness of conduct. So can they see what they're doing is wrong, or not acceptable, right? So what are the psychiatric conditions that may impact that? And then there's this other one that since the 80s, you don't really use legally speaking in the forensics world, but we came up with a volition to conform because, and this is the idea that can you conform in a social situation. A good example of that would be someone has severe phobia, like a enclosed space, and then the sergeant orders you to low crawl through like a little tunnel or something, and they say, go F yourself, sorry, I'm not doing it. And so that may be, a situation where, so when I reflected on most of those cases, in most of those cases, I did not think that their depression or anxiety, most of the cases, either depression or anxiety, would affect their decisional capacity. to affect their behavior. So that was sort of the standards I had set. You guys will have to decide what it is that you want to do and when you check this off. But two examples that come to mind where I said yes is a guy with schizophrenia who ran away from the unit and then came back and he popped positive for marijuana. What do people with schizophrenia do? They smoke a lot and they use a substance often, marijuana, and he was floridly psychotic when that happened. The other one was a guy who was positive for heroin. And it turned out he had PTSD and he was trying to kill himself. And he did not succeed. So he popped positive for the heroin that he had injected, but he was rescued. So I thought that probably misconduct or some other reason. So I said yes to that. And those two were then medically boarded rather than separated under 14. So I think the key thing for me is, especially like in an embedded behavioral health system, if you are the person that keeps on checking yes on everything, you may lose your credibility. So, so just be judicious about, if someone has like GAD or something like that, but, but the behavior has nothing to do with it, just put no on that condition. I think I had one other thing, but I forgot what it was. I'll let you continue.
So when it comes to the end of the appointment, you have your 322, you're referring to Adsep. There's this website called VHAR that you go to, you make a account, and you upload the packets to have ever done this. So I would reach out to help someone who's gone through this process. Then here are what your options are going to be in the VHAR, and I'm kind of running out of time, so I think we've covered everything else that's going to be in this slide deck. To finish out maybe 3 or 4 minutes, does anyone have any comments or things that they wish they had known when they were Q1, B2? Yeah.
I think it was on your first slide, but when you said that most assets are honorable and that they retain their benefits, I've had multiple patients where things deteriorate and they're going to need benefits. What benefits do you bring?
Yeah, so I was talking with Landon about this, who had helped out with some assets when he was doing his behavioral health type stuff. And anything that you were entitled to under the post-9/11 GI Bill, for example, you would retain if you would fully earn those benefits. I don't know the specifics, and I definitely want to know more. Yeah, Alan, yeah.
You qualify.
Specifically the GI Bill.
That's what you have to look at
Even if they want to search like one.
So whatever you qualified for, if you were to separate honorably for another reason, so it's just kind of like, you're separating at this time under honorable conditions, and if you were separating under like a non-Adsep form, then if you had been entitled to those pennies, you would get them. Yeah.
I would say it's like not 100% true. The big premise is that they are going to meet with a VA rep on their way out, and they are the only person that can explicitly look at their file and say what they're going to get. It's kind of case by case. It depends on what you're being asked for, it depends on how long you've been in for, et cetera. So saying, oh, you'll keep everything probably is false hope. Saying you'll get nothing probably is undersells it too. But even at the training we had earlier this year with people in San Antonio, as I said, the only person that can accurately say is their VA rep.
But that's all medical benefits, or
No, I'm saying specifically for like the GI Bill and things like that. Like, yes, there's no, that's not guaranteed, it's case by case, depends on how long they've been in, et cetera. So.
fully actually, yeah. If you qualify at the time you're getting Adsep, you will retain that. If you have a honorable discharge.
There's a table up there that the VA has. Who's seen the table? So there's different types of discharges, assuming you otherwise qualify. and the VA rep was gonna give you thumbs up on, it puts you to death for different categories. The most severe type would be dishonorable discharge, right? Those people, I guarantee you, are not getting anything. They're not getting their GI Bill, even if they've served 20 years. And so the more you go away from dishonorable discharge, you have all these other criteria, right? Other than under general condition, OTH, so on and so forth. And so you have more and more, but it's getting more and more complicated. Like the VA right now, it says all veterans, no matter what, will pay for your behavioral health emergency evaluations, because they're trying to reduce suicides. So anyway, I think it's always important to know not to be the barracks lawyer. So I don't usually tell patients any of that, but if I check yes on that box, I'll call or email the commander and I said, hey, I'm checking that box to yes, and I'm more than happy to discuss the case with you, but when you guys are adjudicating this, I want you to think about what sort of discharge you're gonna consider, so that we can maximize, this individual's ability to transition successfully, and I'm somewhat dramatic, as I wanna make sure they don't end up dead or under a bridge. So those are sort of the two things that you can advocate.
And I've had very limited experience doing this, but a successful way that I've communicated this to command or command calls, for example, has been bringing some of these things as risk mitigation measures to reduce the risk of suicide or bad outcomes. And I found that bringing some of our recommendations as risk mitigation to command can help them to act in service members' best interest and reduce some of their transference, and see what they can do to reduce the risk to the service members, something that's in their best interest. And I found that's been kind of a helpful way to talk when we've had difficult situations. Yeah.
I think just kind of like, one last thing about that. But the reason I was saying you have to ask specifics is because you don't know if they're going to get honorable or general. And so if they get honorable, they're going to get their bid. Like that's what the VA has said clearly, but like we can't predict what type of Adsep are normally end up with discharge. So that's why we shouldn't like fully opine, just because we don't want to say the wrong thing. But if they get honorable, they're going to get everything for sure. If they get general, they'll get some, but not all.
Okay, thank you. And thanks everyone for your attention. I was really nervous doing this talk because like a year and a half ago, I was a civilian HPSP student who had no idea what any of this was. And also thanks to Kevin for the really great slide deck that like made this way less painful. So, thanks guys, that's